the alarm on my command console screamed before I had even finished my morning coffee. In the void of deep space, alarms only screamed in one of two frequencies: either someone had just fired a kinetic kill vehicle at your flank, or someone had made a mistake that was about to rekindle a war. My name is Admiral Clare Dunore. And exactly 3 hours earlier, my trembling signature had finalized the most fragile piece of parchment in human history. It was not a victory. It was not peace. It was a ceasefire, bought with 3 agonizing years of catastrophic bloodshed, millions of fallen soldiers, and billions of credits in pulverized titanium. A pause hanging by a razor-thin thread that any single miscalculation would snap in half. I stood firm on the bridge deck of the United Earth battlecruiser Halcyon Reach when Lieutenant Owen Hale spun in his sensor station, his voice tight enough to crack. "Admiral. We've got a serious anomaly aboard the Kryvex science ship, the vessel of rising tide. Under Article 9 of the Armistice, we had been granted salvage rights to inspect and decommission any enemy vessel too critically damaged to return across the neutral border. It was supposed to be sterile paperwork. Scrap metal inventory." "Report, Lieutenant," I commanded, setting my mug down before the tremor in my fingers could betray my exhaustion. "Biosignatures, ma'am. Faint. Erratic. 3 distinct life signs trapped inside a manually sealed compartment near the lower medical deck. Oxygen scrubbers are failing. Internal temperature is dropping into lethal sub-zero ranges." The entire bridge fell into that suffocating, breathless silence that only happens when seasoned war veterans run the same grim mathematics and arrive at an unthinkable answer. Commander Grace Ellery, my tactical director, frowned deeply. The Kryvex don't abandon their wounded soldiers. Their entire martial doctrine is built on honor and genetic retrieval. If they evacuated that crippled hulk, who the hell did they leave behind? I didn't answer her. Deep down, a cold instinct told me that the answer to that question would matter far more than the treaty we had just ratified. "Prep a boarding shuttle," I ordered calmly. 4-man fire team. Non-lethal loadouts. Sidearms remain holstered unless fired upon. I'm leading the entry myself. "Admiral," with respect, Owen started. "You have your orders, Lieutenant." "Move." The transfer across the void felt endlessly long. Through the shuttle viewport, the vessel of rising tide drifted like a mortally wounded beast. Half its outer ablative plating had been shredded by railgun fire during the final battle of the Meridian debris field. Breaching the inner ring, the alien atmosphere was chillingly familiar. Kryvex architecture was built for predatory conquerors, curving obsidian bulkheads, pulsating violet vein lights, and an unsettling organic aesthetic that felt less like steel and more like the ribcage of an ancient leviathan. We tracked the telemetry down through ruined maintenance shafts until we reached a blast door. It hadn't been sealed by automated ship protocol. It had been jammed shut manually from the outside using a heavy titanium strut. Someone on that ship had deliberately hidden this room from their own evacuation commanders. Grace brought up a plasma torch. Sparks showered onto the deck plates. With a violent screech of warped metal, Grace kicked the partition free. The stench rolled out instantly, sterile coolant, dead air, copper, and beneath it all, the undeniable scent of warm, living flesh. I swept my flashlight across the gloom. It wasn't a military barracks. It was an emergency crash nursery. And huddled in the darkest corner, shivering violently against the freezing steel deck, were 3 tiny, pale shapes. I had spent 3 years staring at Kryvex shock troopers through targeting reticles and across brutal treaty tables. Adult Kryvex were terrifying apex predators, standing 8 feet tall, armored in natural chitinous plates, with obsidian eyes that reflected nothing but calculated lethal force. These 3 were nothing like that. They were fragile. Their protective chitin was soft, translucent, and pale. Their breathing was ragged, shallow gasps of dying infants. They were small enough that I could have scooped all 3 into the crook of my arm. "Admiral." Grace whispered, her voice cracking as she lowered her weapon. This isn't in the treaty. There's no protocol for this. We need to report this to High Command immediately. High Command will debate jurisdiction for 48 hours, I said quietly, stepping forward. These children won't last 48 minutes. As I knelt on the frozen deck, the smallest cub slowly lifted its heavy head. Its massive, glassy black eyes locked onto mine. There was no hatred in those eyes. No interstellar war. Just blinding, primal terror, and the faint, flickering ember of hope that the monster kneeling before it had not come to kill. Their evacuation manifest took heavy casualties during the Meridian retreat, Owen murmured, scanning a cracked console on the nursery wall. This ship took direct hits to its primary power core. In Kryvex culture, Admiral, a designated caretaker must claim a juvenile lineage. If the assigned caretaker is killed in battle, unassigned cubs in combat zones are considered a logistical liability. A liability? Grace asked in horror. Their martial doctrine has zero tolerance for operational deadweight, Owen explained with bitter reluctance. Without a designated bloodline guardian, standard procedure is to decommission the nursery module and let hypothermia take them. Officially. This room does not exist on their manifests. I looked down. The smallest cub let out a faint, dry wheeze. Its tiny, clawed hand reached out blindly into the cold air, brushing the reinforced fabric of my combat trousers before dropping from utter exhaustion. Not on my watch, I said, my voice hardening like tempered steel. Grace, deploy the thermal stabilization cot. Owen, hail the Halcyon Reach. Tell Chief Medical Officer Priya to prep an isolated intensive care bay. Calibrate non-hostile life support for Kryvex pediatric physiology. Grace froze, her eyes wide with shock. Admiral. With all due respect, taking custody of these juveniles could be interpreted by the Kryvex Dominion as an act of war. Removing enemy biological assets without high-level diplomatic clearance violates Article 4. If the Dominion Council claims we kidnapped their young, they are dying children, Commander. I snapped, cutting her off with an authority that echoed off the warped bulkheads. They are not biological assets. They are not leverage. And if the Kryvex War Council wants to court-martial me for refusing to watch toddlers freeze to death in the dark, they can drag me before the Galactic Tribunal themselves. Without waiting for another protest, I reached down. I slid my gloved hands beneath the smallest cub. It weighed almost nothing, hollow-boned, feverish, and trembling uncontrollably. As I pulled the tiny creature against the chest plate of my uniform, expecting it to snap or scratch with its nascent claws, something unexpected happened. The cub ceased shivering. Its tiny, clawed digits latched onto the collar of my service coat. It buried its soft snout into the curve of my neck, letting out a faint, rhythmic purr that sounded like a broken cello. I had ordered orbital bombardments. I had dispatched hundreds of young men and women into dogfights from which half never returned. I had signed death warrants disguised as operational orders. But nothing in my 30 years of fleet service had prepared me for the crushing sacred weight of an enemy infant deciding against every instinct of evolution to trust the very predator that had broken its world. Grace and Owen gently secured the other two cubs into the thermal pod. The flight back to the Halcyon Reach was deathly quiet. I sat in the troop cabin with the smallest cub pressed against my heart, feeling its erratic, fluttering pulse through the thick layers of my tactical uniform. When the airlock hissed open on our flagship, Dr. Priya Nair was already waiting with an emergency biocontainment team. She took one look at the bundle in my arms and didn't waste a single breath on politics. Physiological data on Kryvex development is virtually non-existent outside of battlefield trauma autopsies, Priya said rapidly, sweeping an omni-scanner over the smallest cub. Severe malnutrition. Progressive pulmonary hypothermia. Their metabolic rate is burning through their glucose reserves. Can you stabilize them? I asked. I can synthesize an improvised nutrient formula based on adult xenobiology, but it's a shot in the dark, Claire. Priya looked straight into my eyes. They need hourly syringe or bottle feeding, skin-to-skin thermal regulation, and continuous physical monitoring. Automated medpods will reject them due to lack of species-specific calibration. They need around-the-clock physical handling from someone they don't perceive as a threat. Then prepare the formula, I replied, unbuttoning the high collar of my fleet uniform. I'll handle the night shifts myself. Priya raised an eyebrow in absolute disbelief. Admiral. You have a 300-ship battle group to manage and a diplomatic summit looming that could shatter at any minute. You cannot afford to spend your nights playing foster mother to enemy orphans. I will make time, Doctor, I said softly, looking down at the cub sleeping fitfully in my grasp. Get the nursery ready. By the second night, my command deck had been swapped for the clinical warmth of Medbay 4. I learned more about improvised xenobiological pediatrics in 48 hours than any Fleet Academy curriculum had ever taught in 4 centuries. Priya's improvised formula was a milky, amber-tinted liquid rich in synthetic proteins and sulfur-based minerals. The real challenge wasn't chemical, it was mechanical. The cubs rejected medical feeding tubes violently, thrashing and gagging until their vital monitors flashed warning red. The only method that worked was an old-fashioned, soft-tipped silicone bottle, tilted at a precise 45-degree angle while holding the cub upright against my shoulder. The first time Lieutenant Owen attempted to feed the middle one, the cub sneezed with surprising force, sending a stream of warm, sticky amber formula straight across Owen's immaculate dress uniform. The entire medical staff froze in terror, until I burst into uncontrolled laughter. For the first time in 3 brutal years of war, real, unburdened laughter echoed through the corridors of the Halcyon Reach. I gave them names. In Kryvex society, offspring were assigned cold alphanumeric designations, hatch codes and clan lineage numbers, until they survived the rigorous trials of juvenile selection. To me, calling them Specimen 1, 2, and 3 felt like a continuation of the war. The smallest cub, who clung to my shoulder whenever I sat down, I named Wren. She was restless, with sharp darting eyes reminiscent of the sparrows that nested outside my childhood home. The largest and calmest cub I named Basil. He possessed a quiet, stoic dignity, watching the medical monitors with curious, unblinking intelligence. The third, the most fragile one who flinched at every dropped data pad or loud boot step, I named Fern. You're getting dangerously attached, Admiral, Priya observed on the 4th morning, leaning against the doorframe as she watched me rock Wren in the quiet corner of the ward. I was attached the second I picked them up from that frozen deck, I admitted without looking up. There's no point in pretending to be a detached strategist now. Priya checked Basil's telemetry slate and smiled softly. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Their blood oxygenation is up 40%. Cortisol levels have plummeted. They're imprinting on you, Claire. They recognize your scent and your voice. The moment was interrupted by the sharp entrance of Commander Felix Bramwell, my executive officer. He waited until the medical staff cleared the room before stepping forward, his jaw set in a rigid line. Admiral, Felix said, his voice dropped to a guarded murmur. We need to speak privately. As your second-in-command, and as a friend. Speak freely, Felix. Do you realize what this looks like to the fleet? Felix demanded. Gesturing toward the warming cribs where 3 enemy cubs slept under human thermal blankets. We are less than 2 weeks into a ceasefire that half our captains believe is a Kryvex trap. Almost every crew member on this ship lost a brother, a spouse, or a child to Kryvex orbital strikes. And their supreme commander is spending 6 hours a night bottle feeding the offspring of the butchers who burned the colony of New Geneva. The words hit like kinetic shrapnel. I felt the burn behind my eyes, but my gaze did not waver. When I was 20, I said quietly, adjusting the blanket over Fern, before I ever wore this admiral's crest, I volunteered at a disaster rescue shelter on Earth. Whenever a colony transport collapsed, People argued over which refugees deserved medical rations first. The healthy ones? The high-ranking ones? The ones that made the council look efficient? Felix remained silent. I learned back then that the moment you decide a life is too inconvenient to save because of its uniform, its species, or its politics, you stop being human. If I let 3 children die in the dark simply because they were born on the other side of our weapon sights, then every speech I gave this fleet about defending human decency was a sanctimonious lie. I won't do it, Felix. Not for the fleet, not for the ceasefire, and not for my career. Felix stared at me for a long time. The tension slowly drained from his shoulders. I don't disagree with your humanity, Admiral, he said softly. I just hope you're ready when the Dominion finds out. Because when they do, they won't see a compassionate rescuer. They will see an unforgivable provocation. 30 light-years away, in the heart of the contested sector, the 9 high warlords of the Kryvex Dominion gathered aboard their planetary dreadnought. The Ember of Vashtar. The war chamber was a monolithic rotunda carved from obsidian alloy, lit only by glowing blue arterial conduits running beneath the polished deck. At the center of the grand dais sat Grand General Thraxus Kor, a towering, battle-hardened warlord whose dark chitin armor was scarred across the left chest from a human railgun blast that had nearly claimed his life 2 cycles prior. The council had assembled for routine border logistics, but the session was abruptly seized by Intelligence Commander Vesa Thren. High Council, Vesa announced, her vocal synthesizer trembling with unusual agitation. A severe breach of salvage protocol has been identified regarding the vessel of Rising Tide. The chamber grew dead silent. The loss of that auxiliary craft during the Meridian retreat was a stinging dishonor the High Command had refused to speak of openly. 3 unassigned lineage juveniles were trapped in the lower nursery pod when our forces retreated, Vesa continued. Human salvage teams boarded the vessel 5 rotations ago under Article 9. General Corvath, the oldest, most ruthless hardliner on the council, bared his razor mandibles in fury. The apes have taken our young. They intend to vivisect them in their orbital laboratories. This is a deliberate violation of the armistice. Mobilize the 7th Vanguard. We glass their outer colonies before the cycle ends. Silence, Corvath. Thraxus commanded, his deep baritone reverberating like thunder through the chamber. He turned his dark, obsidian eyes toward Vesa. What became of the juveniles? What intelligence have our spy relays intercepted? We did not intercept a report, General, Vesa answered slowly. Our cryptographic slicing units tapped directly into an unencrypted medical visual feed aboard the human flagship Halcyon Reach. The feed has been broadcasting for 3 consecutive cycles. See for yourselves. The 9 terrifying warlords of the Dominion braced themselves to witness biological torture, dissection, or cold military exploitation. Instead, the holographic projection illuminated the dark chamber with a warm, soft amber light. Displayed before the entire Supreme War Council was a human female in a high-ranking admiral's uniform. She was sitting cross-legged on a bare medical floor. Her fleet jacket was draped over a chair. Her eyes were shadowed with profound exhaustion. Cradled in her left arm was Juvenile Unit 714, Ren, drinking eagerly from a human silicone bottle, its tiny clawed hand resting peacefully against the human commander's throat. On the nearby cushion, 2 other Kryvex cubs were sound asleep under thermal blankets, their soft purrs broadcast clearly through the chamber's audio arrays. The human admiral gently stroked the smallest cub's head ridges, whispering soft, unintelligible human comfort until the infant closed its eyes in total security. For 2 full minutes, not a single Kryvex warlord breathed. The absolute silence inside that hall was heavier than any defeat they had suffered across 3 years of war. In all their millennia of interstellar conquest, they had fought brutal conquerors, ruthless empires, and savage mercenaries. They had never seen this. An enemy supreme commander, the very warrior who had shattered their 3rd Armada at the Battle of the Vale, unarmed, exhausted, sitting on the floor in the dead of night. personally nursing the dying children of her sworn enemy. This is an elaborate human deception. Kryvex stammered, his voice betraying a creeping, uncharacteristic tremor. A synthesized hologram constructed by Earth intelligence to humiliate our martial pride. Diagnostic scans confirm zero digital manipulation, Vesa replied, her voice dropping. It is a continuous, live telemetry transmission. She has been in that room every night for 72 hours. General Nexa, a younger fleet commander who had lost her entire clan in the war, leaned forward. Her dark eyes reflecting the warm glow of the hologram. Why? Nexa whispered into the silence. What tactical victory does an admiral gain from feeding our dead? Thrax's Corps did not look away from the projection. For the first time in his legendary military career, the Grand Warlord's voice was devoid of rage. She is not seeking a tactical victory, Thraxus said quietly. She simply could not bear to let them die. Less than 18 hours after the leaked feed played in the Dominion war chamber, a single, unescorted Kryvex stealth shuttle dropped out of warp space directly inside the Halcyon Reach's primary defensive perimeter. Admiral! Owen yelled from tactical. We have an incoming Kryvex vessel. No escorts. Weapons offline. Shields lowered. It's transmitting a direct priority hail on your personal diplomatic cipher. I walked onto the bridge, buttoning my service jacket. Put it on main audio. The transmission opened. The voice that echoed across our bridge was low, gravelly, and impossibly deep. Human Admiral Dunore. This is Grand General Thrax's Corps. I request permission to board your vessel alone. Unarmed. Without honor guards or diplomatic aids. I come to witness with my own eyes what my council has seen through glass. If you intend to execute me, you may do so upon landing. The bridge crew turned to me in sheer disbelief. Felix took a half-step forward, his eyes wide. Admiral, this has to be an assassination gambit or a suicidal boarding trap. You cannot let the Supreme Commander of the Dominion walk onto this ship. Transmit our docking coordinates, I instructed Owen calmly. Disarm the Marine detachment in Hangar Bay 2. I don't want a single rifle pointed at his chest when he steps off that shuttle. Claire, you're gambling with the entire fleet. Felix hissed. If a warlord is willing to cross enemy lines alone without weapons, the least humanity can do is show him we are not cowards, I answered. Have him brought directly to Medbay 4. I did not wait for him in a formal briefing room. I did not sit behind a mahogany desk surrounded by armed guards. When the heavy doors of Medbay 4 slid open, Thrax's Corps stepped across the threshold. In person, he was terrifying. 9 feet of hardened muscle and dark, battle-scarred carapace, his presence commanding enough to fill the entire corridor. Yet, as his dark glass eyes swept the room, they did not look for tactical consoles or weapon racks. They locked onto me. I was sitting in the same low chair. Ren was perched against my shoulder, halfway through her midday feeding. Fern was resting peacefully against my lap, while Basil sat on a floor pillow, gnawing curiously on a rubber diagnostic ring. Admiral, Thraxus rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through the deck plates. General, I replied evenly, not moving an inch. You'll forgive me if I don't stand to salute. If I disrupt Ren's latch right now, she gets cranky. Something shifted in Thraxus's predatory gaze. The rigid, lethal posture of a commander who had slaughtered worlds slowly unraveled. With agonizing, deliberate slowness, the massive Kryvex warlord sank to his knees on the sterile floor, his massive armored frame folding down until his eyes were level with the infant cribs. Basil, completely unafraid of the giant looming over him, waddled forward on wobbly limbs and placed a tiny claw against Thraxus's massive, scarred gauntlet. Thraxus stopped breathing. This one. The warlord whispered, his voice trembling with an emotion his translator struggled to render. He carries the crest markings of the 714th lineage. From the rising tide. I didn't have access to your birth registries, I said softly. So I gave them names. That one is Basil. The little one clinging to my jacket is Wren. And the sleeper in my lap is Fern. Thraxus slowly raised his head, staring at me as if looking at an alien species he had never encountered in 30 years of exploration. You named them, he repeated, his voice cracking. My people would have decommissioned them as combat liabilities. We have accepted the loss of unassigned young for 1,000 generations as the mathematical price of survival. Why did you not leave them? Because out here in the black, General, I answered, meeting his unreadable gaze. The only thing that keeps us from turning into monsters is refusing to walk past someone who needs help. We spent 3 years killing each other. I decided 3 lives were enough to save. The silence in Medbay 4 stretched for several minutes, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic purring of the 3 sleeping cubs. Thraxus remained kneeling on the cold deck. He slowly turned his massive hand over, allowing Basil to climb onto his armored wrist. The cub rubbed its soft snout against the scarred chitin of the general's thumb, completely unbothered by the fact that this was the most feared warrior in the Orion arm. You lost someone in the war, didn't you, General? I asked quietly, breaking the stillness. Thraxus didn't pull his hand away. His gaze remained locked on Basil. In the second cycle of the conflict, he spoke, his gravelly voice dropping to a raw, hollow whisper. A civilian evacuation transport departing the Meridian sector. My bond mate was aboard. Along with our first hatch infant. The vessel was caught in the crossfire of an orbital saturation strike. I was commanding the sector battle line 60 light minutes away. He paused, his heavy shoulders sagging under the invisible weight of 3 years of repressed agony. I spent every rotation since that day telling myself their deaths were an unavoidable consequence of our species' struggle for dominance. I convinced my council, and myself, that empathy in war is a fatal weakness. He looked up at me, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed moisture. And then I watched you. An enemy admiral who owed my people nothing but vengeance. Sitting in the dark, defying your own government, giving your own warmth to cubs that were not your blood. And I realized. I did not accept my family's death because of military duty. I accepted it because I was too cowardly to believe another way was possible. Grief makes liars of us all, Thraxus, I said gently. You couldn't have saved that transport. But you can save what comes after. Thraxus reached out with an impossibly gentle finger, lightly stroking Fern's soft back as the cub slept against my knees. My council is tearing itself apart, Claire, he admitted, using my first name for the first time. Hardliners like Corvith see your mercy as an insidious psychological weapon. They believe a species that shows mercy to enemy infants is unpredictable, and therefore far more dangerous than an enemy that fights with total ruthlessness. And what do you believe? Thraxus stood. To his full 9-foot height. Looking down at the 3 living miracles resting safely in the belly of a human warship. I believe that for 3 years, we fought an enemy we did not understand. And I believe that if my people destroy this peace, we will be destroying the only species in this galaxy capable of teaching us how to be whole. He placed his closed fist over his scarred chest plate, the ancient, sacred salute of Kryvex blood fealty. The formal peace summit convenes aboard the neutral station Meridian Prime in 2 weeks, Thraxus said with unwavering conviction. General Corvith intends to scuttle the treaty and demand immediate custody of the juveniles as an act of human submission. I ask you to bring the cubs to the summit. Bring them into a diplomatic war zone. I frowned. Bring them so the galaxy can see what true strength looks like, Thraxus replied. Let them see that humanity does not conquer with orbital fire, but with an unbreakable refusal to let innocence die. The Meridian Prime station hung suspended in the graveyard of 500 pulverized battleships, a grim monument to 3 years of mutual slaughter. Inside the Grand Amphitheater, over 200 delegates from the Kryvex Dominion, the United Earth Alliance, and neutral star systems sat in tense, segregated tiers. Armed security detachments from both fleets lined the perimeter, their hands hovering within inches of holstered plasma rifles. At the center of the diplomatic floor, General Corveth stood before the assembly, his voice amplified across all broadcast channels. The Kryvex Dominion will not ratify this sham treaty. Corveth roared, his mandibles flaring with righteous fury. Humanity claims to seek coexistence, yet their first act during the ceasefire was to unlawfully seize 3 highborn Dominion lineage juveniles from a salvage hulk. They parade our young as trophies of war. We demand the immediate, unconditional surrender of the specimens, or the Dominion fleet will open fire across all border sectors within the hour. Human ambassadors rose in shouting protests. Weapons clicked off safety catches along the perimeter. The entire armistice was seconds away from detonating into total galactic war. The roar of the amphitheater instantly died. Walking through the central archway was not a company of armored Earth Marines. It was me. I wore my pristine Navy fleet dress uniform, walking with measured, unhurried steps down the central ramp. And at my side was Dr. Priya Nair, pushing a gleaming, transparent mobile incubator pod. Inside the pod, fully awake and healthy, were Ren, Basil, and Fern. The entire assembly of 200 alien diplomats gasped in collective disbelief. Ren was standing upright on her hind legs, pressing her tiny front paws against the glass, chirping with curious delight at the towering ceiling lights. Basil was sitting peacefully, chewing on a synthetic fruit ration, while Fern peeked shyly from behind Priya's protective medical sash. Corvetha's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He drew his ceremonial energy blade and stormed down the central dais, his towering 8-foot frame casting a menacing shadow over the nursery pod. You dare bring them here like pets? Corveth snarled, raising the glowing blade. I will liberate our lineage from human contamination this instant. Before Corveth could take another stride, Grand General Thraxus Kor intercepted him with blinding speed. Thraxus's armored forearm slammed into Corvetha's chest, knocking the older warlord back 3 full paces onto the polished stone floor. Lower your blade, Corveth, Thraxus bellowed, drawing no weapon of his own, standing like an immovable mountain between the hardliner and the human medical team. Traitor! Corveth spat, scrambling to his feet. You side with the apes over your own flesh and blood. Look at them, you blind fool. Thraxus's voice shook the very foundation of the station. Look at their scales. Look at their breathing. When your cowards abandoned that ship, those children were left to freeze in the dark. Their organs were shutting down. Their lungs were filled with fluid. Thraxus turned and pointed at me. This human admiral did not build laboratories to dissect them. She did not place them in cages to barter for territory. She sat on the deck of her warship every night for 40 cycles, hand-feeding them when our own doctrine commanded them to die. If that is what you call human contamination, then I say our entire dominion has forgotten what honor means. Corveth looked past Thraxus. His blazing eyes locked onto the incubator pod. As the hardliner stood frozen, the pod door slid open. Ren, the boldest and most curious of the 3, waddled out onto the cold marble floor. She looked up at the terrifying, blade-wielding Corveth with massive, unblinking eyes. Slowly, without a trace of fear, the tiny cub reached out her clawed paw and gently tapped the polished metal toe of Corvetha's combat boot, letting out a soft, inquisitive chirp. General Corveth stared down at the tiny hand resting against his boot. The blade in his grip flickered, sputtered, and powered down. His predatory eyes widened as the realization of his own brutal worldview crumbled beneath the innocent touch of a child that should have been dead. Slowly, the oldest warlord in the Kryvex Empire sank to one knee. With hands that had signed the destruction of entire planetary outposts, Corveth gently extended 2 fingers. Ren immediately grabbed them, purring with triumphant delight as she tried to pull the giant general closer. A solitary, shuddering breath escaped Corvetha's chest. They live, he whispered, his voice stripped of all hatred. By the ancestors. They are alive. Across the amphitheater, the silence broke, not with weapons fire, but with a thunderous, rising ovation from human and alien delegates alike. That afternoon, aboard Meridian Prime, the Treaty of the Meridian was officially signed. It was not merely a ceasefire. It was a comprehensive, permanent alliance that reshaped the geopolitical balance of the Orion Arm. 10 solar cycles have passed since that historic day. Today, I stand upon the observation deck of the Meridian Joint Academy, a sprawling orbital research hub built inside the very debris field where the vessel of rising tide once drifted in ruins. Through the panoramic viewport, I watch human and Kryvex officers walking shoulder to shoulder, sharing meals, engineering blueprints, and tactical data. Beside me stands Grand General Thraxus Kor, now the Supreme High Arbiter of the Dominion Council. His hair is streaked with silver, and his battle scars have softened with age, but his presence remains as imposing as ever. Do you ever wonder, Claire? Thraxus rumbles softly, turning his dark eyes toward me. What would have happened if you had followed standard military protocol that morning? If you had left that compartment sealed? I smiled, watching 3 figures step onto the lower observation tier below us. Basil has grown into one of the most brilliant xenobiological physicians in the sector, currently leading the Joint Human-Alien Pediatric Research Division. Fern, still thoughtful and calm, serves as the Chief Director of Interstellar Refugee Relief, ensuring no orphan of war is ever abandoned across 50 star systems. And Ren stands tall in the crisp, gold-trimmed uniform of the Coalition Diplomatic Corps, commanding the attention of an entire assembly of young cadets with the same fierce, unyielding curiosity she possessed as an infant. I try not to think about what might have been, Thraxus, I replied, watching Ren catch my eye from below and flash an unmistakable, cheeky human salute. I only know what happened because we refused to look away. History will write that this peace was forged through political genius and resource trade pacts, Thraxus said with a low, rumbling laugh. They will write volumes about treaties and borders. Let them, I said softly, resting my hand against the cold viewport glass. You and I will always know the truth. The greatest empires in the galaxy are not built on the firepower of dreadnoughts or the terror of orbital lances. They are built in the quiet, forgotten corners of the dark, where someone looks at the child of their mortal enemy, sets down their weapons, and chooses to feed them instead.